working on Harriers. Just that whole elevator, rudder, throttle. To dance. All right, welcome. Hey, we've got the Crack Yak from Twisted Hobbies here in the shop. A friend of mine, you know, already have one. You've probably seen some of my videos on it. I think this plane is outstanding. And I kept pressing my buddy Matt to get one. Well, he finally gets one. And I offered to assemble it for him and show you all the assembly process. I know there's a lot of videos on it, but always looking for content, and why not, right? So I'm going to take you along the ride. He bought the kit. He bought the power pack, which comes with a prop, O-rings, servos, speed controller, all that. I'm going to talk to him to see if he wants to put on the landing gear or not. It's nice, it's lightweight, but I typically chuck it and land mine in the grass. This would just rip off. If you were flying indoors exclusively with it, I think it would be a different story. Anyway, let me take you along the ride the best I can, showing you the process. First thing I have to do is download and print this, their manual. A lot of details in it, you know, on putting this thing together. So stick around, we'll go through it. All right, so you just saw that we've basically moved those control surface as far as the hinges, put some weight on it, let it sit there. I actually let it sit overnight, not for any reason other than I just didn't get back to it. So these move very easily. Next step is we're gonna build this flat part of the fuselage, get the wings connected. You'll notice they're only gonna go on one way. These little notches are very specifically sized, meaning, as you can see, now it can only go together one way. So we're going to do that, and the tail also is keyed very specifically, so it only goes one way. I'm going to use foam tack. I'm going to put a bead on there, squish them together, pull them apart, let it kind of tack up a little bit, and then push everything together. So pretty simple process. In the instructions they say use welders. Can't hardly get welders anymore. Foam tack's been proven to work very well for foam to foam contact for me, so that's what we're going to use. All right, I'm just gonna, let's do, so you can see where we got to put it from here to here. So I'm just going to put it on a nice healthy amount. Really should take the nozzle off so it flows a little bit better here. And put that together, pull apart. Same thing over on this one. And I don't think you need to skimp on glue. I think having a fair amount is a good thing. Squeeze it in there, pull apart, squeeze it in there. Okay, let that sit for a second. And do the same thing on the tail. Let that tack up for a minute. And then I'm pushing that together, pushing that together. Pushing the tail together. I want this totally flat. So I'm going to take a couple big lead weights that I have to make sure that everything I want to also make sure we're lining up good. So I really like this. I like this board here that I can line up the wings perfectly, centered, make sure the tail section's centered, and I can look to make sure that everything is kind of lining up just perfect. And then I'm going to put down the weights again. Make sure it's pushed up against it now. This is just the initial step, right? We've got a spar going in here, and we have some other material that's going to lock all this in place. But for right now, you know, we're pretty good to go. We're going to let that lock in and tack or kind of finish gluing, and then we'll go to the next step. One thing we can do while this is drying, the glue's drying, is I'm going to go through with a brand new blade on this knife and remove all these little tags of foam. Brand new knife, nice and sharp, get clean cuts and remove all of this stuff that's where the side force generators are going to get glued into. They're very efficient. They're looking at this to be a 30-minute build or something, the way they kind of go through. While things are drying, you're doing other things. Follow the instructions. The instructions are very good. You know, I would say that they're not lacking at all. So anyway, all right, so we got all that stuff all ready to go. All right, we'll take a break. Gluing in the wooden spar, wing spar, not a big deal, but there's a bunch of material you have to remove. So here I go through with my knife, just cutting out all the different pieces to enable that strip of wood right there to slide in place. I did a couple dry fits. My spar was just like a 1/16 of an inch long, so just either sanding the wood or removing some material from the foam, which is the option I did, just a little bit more on the ends, just so it fit in nice. That was it. Pretty simple, but definitely go through the dry fit. It's going to slide in like so, kind of pull the plane apart a little bit, slide it in place. Once you're comfortable with that, let's apply some glue. Now I apply a generous amount of foam tack to the spar, kind of making sure it's smeared all over. I guess I could have used a brush to kind of make sure it was a nice even coat, but I didn't do that. So, but again, not a big deal. Put your glue on, put it on both sides, shove it in that gap which you've created and tested, and you're good. Of course, make sure it's seated all the way down. Make sure that the gap is closing. As far as you see, I'm kind of pushing, squeezing everything together. And once I have that all done, now I'm using some weights just to keep everything flat while the glue cures a little bit. Shit. There is a canopy. It requires a thin bead of glue and apply it to the top of the fuselage. It takes 5 seconds. There are a mess of little plastic parts. So you've got little clevises for your push rods, you've got control horns, you've got all these little pieces that need to be cut out. And I just use a pair of side cutters to clip everything out. You could use a little sandpaper afterwards, and I would use sandpaper on all the horns, all the control horns, just to make sure the glue adheres properly to that. There is a thing, a heat shrink. I cut it into 4 equal pieces, and I use those on the control rods. Cut out the side force generators. Takes 5 seconds. Again, not really 5 seconds, but you know what I mean. And you're good to go. There's a lot of this, right? Cutting out parts, doing some prep work while glue is drying. It's kind of a speed build process. You're never just sitting there waiting for glue to cure. Assembling the push rods, they're a little fiddly. You're going to have these little plastic clevises. What I end up doing is sanding a little bit of the carbon fiber spar, or the rod, just to rough it up. I use some E6000, just a super light coat of E6000, and then attach that clevis. There's a little indent on the clevises where where the rod lays. And then I take a piece of that shrink tubing and slide it over all of it. So that holds it in place, and later I'm going to go grab my heat gun and shrink that on there to keep those things solid. Sliding that shrink tube on the Aileron control rods is a little tough. It doesn't quite fit. There's a couple things that I learned on this. Is either shove a screwdriver or something to widen it, or spread out that shrink tubing so it slides over the clevis and the rod. And it does. It just takes a little work. Now things are going to get moving here a little faster. We've got some servos to install, the Aileron servo, and I think that's the elevator servo. Look at the manual or the instructions for that. I don't glue those in, but what I do glue in is that bottom part of the fuse. Again, a generous amount of foam tack. Do not put foam tack where your servos are going to go. And in the documentation, it specifically shows where not to put it, but you'll figure it out. Put that down there and just don't put glue around it. Pretty simple. Just make sure a lot of glue, and when it sits in place, everything is straight and at a 90-degree angle to the base fuselage. You'll get what I'm saying. You'll see it sticking off the end of the table quite a bit, and that's because the Aileron servo is on the other side and it won't lay flat. So pushing it off like that solves the problem. Attaching the control horns. Now there's two different sets. A set that goes on the aileron, and a set that goes on the elevator rudder. So take a look at that, and it shows in the documentation which one's which. They need to be seated all the way, so you are going to have to use your hobby knife and cut some material out, test fit, cut some material out, test fit, go through that process. They should seat all the way down, and it's important that where the clevis attaches is right in the middle of the hinge line. So keep that in mind. Also, when I glue these, I scratch up the surface of that plastic before I apply the foam tack and slide it in place. The top of the fuse, just like the bottom. One thing I would note, and make sure when you're pushing on the bottom and or the top, that it clears the servos, because you have those servo arms on there, and when you're putting that down, make sure that foam isn't touching any part of those, the control arms or the servo arms. If so, cut out a little material of foam. Not a big deal. Now apply a bunch of glue, stick it on there, and you're ready to go. Make sure it's straight. You notice I have a pool noodle on one side and a chunk of foam on the other side of the wing, just to brace it so it lays above the table. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to, fiddle with it. All the control horns have these little easy connectors. There's a pin on it, there's a grub screw, and it pokes through the bottom, of the control horn. And then you slide this weird little star washer thing on. I was just having a hell of a time sliding it on. So, found a way that I can push those on without busting my thumbs, which is just taking a small hex driver and getting it started and then seating it the rest of the way. I don't know. Quick shop tip. Kind of cool. Worked well. Attaching the vertical stabilizer, just like everything else with this, it requires a bunch of glue. So a lot of foam tack, put that in place, and it's kind of fiddly. There's no locking mechanisms. So I would recommend in this case a lot of the glue, tack it up, let it sit a little while, push it together. I do add some reinforcing, which I'll show here in a minute, to the bottom of it. I doesn't call for it in the instructions, but I'm doing it anyway. While the glue is curing, just double check it a couple times. Make sure everything is perfect on that,
because if not, you're going to have to cut it off and reapply it, which is a pain. On my other Crack Yak, I did put a small strip. It's about 3 millimeter by 0.5 millimeter strip of carbon fiber, and I just slice between the fuselage and the vertical stabilizer, shove in a bunch of glue, and shove in the carbon fiber spar deep enough that when I pinch it all closed, you can't even see it. Motor mount glues on, and I use a lot of glue. We're going to reinforce it a little bit later. Like everything on this build, it's pretty simple. It just all kind of pieces together. The side force generators are no different. You have two different size ones. Larger ones go on the inside, smaller ones go on the outside. Foam tack, both sides. Make sure it's in there's a little hole, a couple little gaps there, and it just slides in place. Make sure it's seated all the way. I don't think it's going to hurt anything if it isn't, but it's just going to look bad. Control horns for the tail section are no different, yeah, but they are the same control horns, like I talked about. I think it's important to, clean out, the space where they go, dry fit, make sure everything's looking good, and then a bunch of glue, shove it in place. All right, we're going to reinforce with Blenderm. So that's a process of putting down a bunch of foam tack, smearing it with my brush, and then laying a piece of foam or Blenderm tape around 1.5 inches long. In some cases, I might cut that strip, make it, instead of 1 inch wide, I'll make it maybe a 1/2 inch wide. There's a couple variations there. Bottom line is you need to reinforce the motor mount as well as some of the areas on the wings and tail section. It's all well documented in the instructions. Motor will come with 4 self-tapping screws, and simple as that. The motor mount has little holes in it. It's kind of a pain to line everything up, and the magnets in the motor keep grabbing the screw. It takes a little, it takes about 4 hands to do it, but it's not a problem. The control rods for the tail section have these little plastic guides, and so it's important to put on those plastic guides, like here, before you start trying to attach this thing. So there's little holes, very, very small holes in the fuselage, and each one of those guides slides into that hole to make sure that, obviously the control rod's not bending. I put a dab of foam tack, shove it in place. You could use CA, you could use whatever kind of glue you want. I've used foam tack on this and it works fine. One thing I want to point out is those clevises. There's only one hole in the control arm, so those clevises just lock into place. It just clips into that. The Aileron servo arm is included. It's a lot longer than what the stock servo arms are going to be. That needs to be screwed on place right in the middle. It's a little fiddly to do, but you can see there what I've done. It's a black reinforcing truss, glues on at a 45-degree angle. On one side, you're going to use full length. On the other side, because you're going to have the ESC and the pieces and parts, it's not going to be full length. All right, she's done. And like a lot of my builds, I start getting carried away in the end, and I just start going. It's hard to film and build
or assemble. So, yeah, well, it's done now. I will highlight a couple things. One is, and point out the fact that this is an easy assembly. If you follow the instructions, and they kind of have you speed build, where as glue is drying in one area, you're working on something else. They have you zip along pretty quick. Filming it is very different. Had to try to show everything. Did the Blenderm all over, kind of showed those things. I tried to show as much as I could. Installing these trusses. This truss, I stopped it right there just because the bundle of wires, it's fine. Other than that, and I zip tie a whole bunch of these wires together. A lot of times I'll take that zip tie and I will cut the tag at an angle and push it in with some glue and hold it there, and it's kind of like a little, this one popped out, but anyway, if you could see where, basically I'm using that, the zip tie as a keeper, and then I'm pushing that into the foam and gluing it into the foam. I do it on a lot of planes, just makes things nice and tidy. Glued the servos. That's like one of the last things you do after you get the push rods, everything's set up right. Glue the servos in. You could do whatever you want with hot glue and take them out easy with denatured alcohol. Motor, propeller, ESC. This was a part of the combo kit or the power kit that my friend bought from Twisted Hobbies. All the servos work great. It was just the Aileron servo. I had to cut a trim a little bit to give it some clearance, but other than that, it was fantastic. Hey, if you like this video, hit that like button. If you've got any questions, leave a comment. See ya. Oh, what are the chances? Oh. What an idiot.